Hi, my name is Stephanie Neiman. Today I am going to talk about Liszt Ballade No. 2 in B minor. Liszt was a composer from the Romantic era. His life spans near the entire 19th century. He knew Chopin, Schumann, Mendelssohn from the early part of the Romantic period, and also Brahms and Wagner. Romantic period was a time of passionate music, often a theme of love and tragedy. Franz Liszt was one of the great piano virtuosos of the 19th century, and he wrote many original works and transcription for the piano. A few major Liszt works include the two ballades, the etudes, like the Transcendental Etudes, the Paganini Etudes, and the Concert Etudes. The etudes were inspired by the virtuosic playing of the violinist Niccolò Paganini. Liszt was amazed when he heard how Paganini could do seemingly anything on the four strings of his violin, and he wanted to bring that same level of virtuosity to the piano. Liszt's innovations with the piano technique totally changed the way of playing the instrument. He also wrote Years of Pilgrimage, including the famous works like Ballade Doberman, Dante's Sonata, Giorgio Villa d'Este. This is a monumental cycle of piano pieces in 3 volumes that span his travels throughout his life. They were written from about 1835 to 1877, from he was about 25 years old to at the end of his life, basically. Liszt's B minor sonata is magnum opus for piano, although it wasn't too popular during his lifetime. Liszt did a lot of transcription of music from Bach to his contemporaries. For example, the Schubert songs and the Beethoven symphonies. He was one of the first composers to include historical music in his concerts. Most pianists at that time played the popular pieces of the time and also their own music. Liszt's second ballade was composed in 1853. It was written in B minor, the same tonality as the piano sonata. Also, the sonata and the ballade were composed and published in the same year. He had already given up playing public concerts when this piece was written. He switched his focus to composing instead. Liszt was inspired by Chopin in titling this composition Ballade. Chopin wrote 4 ballades for solo piano, and he got the title from the Ballade in poetry, which is an extended poem with a narrative story. Chopin probably had some particular story in mind when he wrote his ballades, but there is no document to link any of the ballades to a particular story. We can certainly imagine that Liszt also had a specific story in mind when he wrote this piece, but we don't know for sure what that story could be. In this lecture, I will start by looking at how Liszt takes models from the classical period and changes them to suit his own expressive needs. We will get some more new insight into how to compare and contrast the classical and romantic styles. I will then look at some technical challenge in this ballade and suggest some practice techniques. Finally, I will consider Liszt's teaching methods and talk about how to use imagery as pedagogical tool when teaching romantic works. Even though it's called a ballade, Liszt actually borrows the familiar sonata allegro form that we know from classical sonatas. He then changes the sonata allegro form in many interesting ways. For example, we know that the first section of a sonata form, or the exposition, moves from the tonic key to related key, usually the dominant, and it has 2 contrasting themes. Let's look at the beginning of the Liszt Ballade. Here is the first theme. How would you describe it? Maybe gloomy or troubled? Rapid chromatic runs accompany a melancholy melody. And here is the second theme. I think we can safely say that the second theme is in a contrasting character. It is so light and beautiful, with angelic chords in the upper register. Liszt marks the first theme, allegro moderato and marcato, and the second theme is a milder allegretto and dolce. Also, notice the key change. The first theme was in B minor, and then Liszt modulates to F sharp major for the second theme, just as we expect in sonata allegro form. But then, after the exposition, things get a little funky. Usually, Mozart and Haydn sonatas will have a repeat sign after the exposition. Often pianists these days will cut the repeat, but Mozart and Haydn definitely intended the exposition to be played twice. Liszt actually writes out the exposition repeat, but then he changes the key from B minor to B flat minor, down by a half step. That's something that Mozart or Haydn definitely wouldn't have considered part of their sonata form. If you go through and analyze the Ballade in detail, you'll find that it follows sonata form pretty closely, but there are some unusual changes. For example, the recapitulation section, where all the themes from the exposition return, is not in B minor, as we'd expect, but in B major instead. Also, instead of bringing back that first theme as we would remember it, Liszt changed it using his technique of thematic transformation. The idea of thematic transformation is especially important to understanding Liszt's musical style, so I'll talk about that briefly. Thematic transformation is a process of modifying a theme so that in a new context it is different but yet made of the same elements. It could be by changing the rhythm, the melodic detail, dynamic, or character of a theme to adapt it to a different purpose, often for programmatic reasons. A common way to develop themes in the classical period was to take small motifs and use them in new ways. Beethoven used this technique in his Pathetic Sonata. Listen to this example. Listen to the motif at the beginning of the sonata. This little four-note idea is the basis of the whole opening melody, which is the C, D, E flat, D. Listen for the same motif in the development section. In Beethoven's work, a small motif is a building block that can be used to build huge musical castles. In many of Liszt's works, the building block is much larger, consisting of a fully developed theme. This is where thematic transformations comes in. Instead of using small motifs to create new musical ideas, Liszt transformed the character of the whole theme by changing the harmony or the texture. For example, here is the opening theme. And later on in the piece, here is the same theme transformed into major. Liszt gives these themes a totally different character with the accompaniment as well. The beginning has low chromatic runs that blur the texture and have a mysterious sound. In the major section, the arpeggios in the middle register have a lighter and more melodious quality, like harp, perhaps. And then, here is the final appearance of the theme. Let's look at the diagram I made to show how Liszt uses the sonata allegro form in his Ballade No. 2. So, in this ballade, Liszt still preserves the three sections that is in the sonata allegro form. For example, there is still the exposition, development, and recapitulation section in this piece. The first section, the exposition section, still have theme 1 and theme 2 contrasting from each other. The first theme in B minor and the second theme is in the dominant key of F sharp major. This piece also has the repeated exposition section, but Liszt write it out the second time instead of putting a repeat mark. However, the repeated section is transposed to B flat minor, a half step lower. In this repeated section, there is still theme 1 and theme 2. Theme 1 in B flat minor, and the theme 2 is in F major. In the recapitulation section, the theme 1 and theme 2 reappear again, just like in the sonata allegro form. Although the theme 1 doesn't quite sound like the theme 1 in the beginning. But all the motivic idea is there. It's transformed into a different setting and mood. The first and the second theme in the recapitulation section is usually in the tonic key, but Liszt modified it to B major, the parallel major key of B minor. There are many interesting technical challenges in this music. I want to focus briefly on how to overcome some of these difficulties. There are technical difficulties toward the end of this piece, including playing chords quickly and loudly. But once you know the trick to do these passages, it is actually not bad at all. I will focus on how to play one specific passage from the coda. Two technical things to remember is to plan ahead and to use your wrist. When you want to jump to the next position and be prepared before playing the chord, look ahead with your eyes. Feel the keyboard with your fingers and make sure that you know where the black keys will be. It is easier for the finger to catch the black keys than the white keys. When you want to jump to the next position, be prepared before playing the next chord. Look ahead with your eyes So when you play this chord, your eyes is already looking at the next chord. And it's very easy if you can feel the black keys. So in this case, the F sharp is on the first finger, and the third, the D sharp, and the fifth on the F sharp. You can feel and jump a little bit faster when you can catch the black keys. After you play the first chord, you can use the position of your hand to find the next chord. So your first finger going to be where the fifth finger used to be in the previous chord. Also, the chord is the same, only an octave higher every time it comes. So the shape of your hands will be the same as well. It is also crucial to use your wrist in this passage. Our natural instinct is to attack the chords after a leap, which gives you a harsh tone and can make you miss the chords. So but we actually need to grab the chords with your fingers and kick up with your wrist to get a lot of power from your arm and body. So play the first chord and grab it with your hands, your fingers, and kick it up with your wrist. This way, the sound is round and your hand and wrist will be relaxed. A stiff wrist in complicated sections is a common problem among students. Our instinct is to lock our hand so that we have more control of our hand position and won't miss notes. Unfortunately, by locking your wrist, you make your hand tense and you will get tired easily. A better solution is to allow the wrist to move freely and plan the hand positions carefully. Surprisingly, even though it feels more risky, you'll play more accurately with a relaxed wrist and hands positioned. With all the technical difficulties, it is easy to lose the theme in this section, especially with all those chordal accompaniments. I would suggest practicing this passage by just playing the theme by itself without the octave chord accompaniment. This way, we can hear the melody clearly and carefully shape the melody. It is important to shape the accompaniment, not just the melody. Make sure that the first accompanying chord of each group is not too loud so that it doesn't overshadow the melody. We can still crescendo on accompaniment chords after the first one for bigger effect afterwards, but it is crucial not to play the first chord too loud. Start soft. Start soft. When you are teaching Liszt music, it is helpful to see how Liszt taught. Liszt was also a teacher. We can look into his teaching style for inspiration. Liszt started to teach after his father's death in 1827. His schedule of teaching was from 8:30 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day with barely any break in between. Wow! But during the years of his concert tour, Liszt only gave a few lessons. He was also the creator of Piano Masterclass. He gave group lessons at his home 3 days a week, attended by by a substantial crowd of aspiring artists. It is interesting to read how Liszt taught, especially when trying to teach his own music. He often would use descriptive terms to inspire his students. This is good to bear in mind when we teach Liszt music, or in fact any music from the Romantic period, to our students. Students will often find that it's more fun when you use figurative language. For example, in the final melody, the arpeggiations above the melody could be like floating clouds. This will help your student technically also because they will play with a lighter touch and it will happen more naturally. According to renowned pianist Claudia Arrau, who studied with Martin Krauss, who was one of Liszt's students, this particular ballad has been linked with the story of the myth of Hero and Leander. Hero and Leander is the Greek myth relating the story of Hero who lives in the tower in Sestos on the European side of the Hellespont. And Leander, a young man from Abydos on the opposite side of the strait. Leander fell in love with Hero and would swim every night across the Hellespont to be with her. Hero would light a lamp at the top of her tower to guide his way. One stormy winter night, the waves tossed Leander in the sea, and the breeze blew out Hero's light. Leander lost his way and was drowned. When Hero saw his dead body, she threw herself over the edge of the tower to die with him. Relating this story to your students can help them to shape their own performances and also to make intelligent decisions about interpretation. With some students, Stories are an inspiration, and they will get much more out of the piece than they would with note-to-note teaching. With other students, stories will help them to remember more specific musical suggestions that we offer, and they can then relate these details to a bigger picture. Before I finish this lecture, I would like to make a few recommendations on recordings for this piece. There is a video recording of Claudio Oro playing this piece on his 80th birthday live at Avery Fisher Hall in New York City, on YouTube actually. Also, for a polished performance, check out the Stephen Hoff's recording of this piece in his Liszt Sonata, Ballades, and Polonaise album. Thank you for watching this video.